I will say this very carefully. Um, I am gender critical, and I don't mean gender critical. I am a little bit like that, I guess, because I'm very open to nuance and discussing. What I am is critical of gender. That's
Yeah.
not critical of transgender, that's critical of gender.
Mm.
And I see some people talk about going from gender dysphoria to gender euphoria. I think I got rid of the dysphoria. I went through the euphoria honeymoon phase, past that now, and
Yeah.
now I simply, I think, remain as critical. I'm also sex critical as well as gender critical in that sense. I think sex and gender are both problematic categories, both problematic and pressured existences to try and conform to.
Hello and welcome to the 50 Shades of Gender podcast. We get curious about all things gender, sex, and sexuality, as well as relationships, feminism, the inclusive kind, neurodivergence, disability, kink, mental health, and all that makes us humans unique and diverse. From body positivity to body dysmorphia, it's all welcome here. Visit the website 50shadesofgender.com, as in FIFTY, for helpful resources to support us or to find out about our gender diversity and allyship workshops and courses. A massive thank you to those who have donated and those who are or used to be patrons. You really make a massive difference. I appreciate you and you're awesome. Thanks also to those of you who have sent in your stories, poems, or art for the Anthology of Hope. I've been absolutely blown away by your incredible grit and joy and defiance, and of course, hope. And I'm so excited to announce that the book will be out in spring 2026. The crowdfunder will be launching in the next few weeks. Go to 50shadesofgender.com/hope for more information and updates. Now join us on a journey of inclusion, acceptance, and respect. I'm your host, Esther Lemons. I am a queer woman, and my pronouns are she and they. In this episode, I have another conversation with Katy Jon Went, a public speaker, educator, and campaigner on many subjects, including sex and gender. Katy's pronouns are they, them, she, her, but tolerates occasional he, hims. They see themselves as a transgender person, identifies non-binary and asexual, and where they've landed since our last conversation is post-gender. Find out what that means to Katy in this episode. We also talk about holding opposing truths, internal comfort over external acceptance, having no surgery regrets, letting go of masks, the context of pronoun use, doing what you have to do to be happy, and arriving at simply being human. Please be aware there is mention of transphobic language and conversion therapy in this episode. It was recorded on the 17th of February 2026. Now let's get into the episode. Hello and welcome. What's your name?
Oh, my name.
Yeah.
Yeah, my name hasn't changed since the last time we spoke. My name is
Ah,
still Katy Jon Went, and
nice.
I'm really old now. So you can't ask my age because that's the main reason for transitioning. So you're not allowed to ask my age.
Okay, then that's fair enough. Yes, so welcome back, Katy. So I had you on the podcast for episode 16, and you've been saying you wanted episode 116. And when you first said it, I thought, I don't know if I'll ever get there, but here we are, which is incredible. So yeah, welcome back. So the last episode, your first episode, was recorded in October 2020. So 5.5-ish years ago. What has changed for you? Big question. Where would you like to start?
Well, I remember saying I didn't want to be episode 1. I wanted you to get practiced at that. So, and then after doing episode 16, I thought I'd set you a goal to keep going. Like, I'll do another one in 100 episodes time.
Thank you
And I
so
know we
much.
have like, and I know we have our once every 25 episodes check in to see what you're learning, what I'm learning. But yeah, it's 5.5 years, and I'm proud to say I'm not the same person I was 5.5 years ago, and I won't be in another 5.5 years, 5.5 months, 5.5 weeks. Who knows? So I think one of my biggest lessons is that if being trans is about change, it isn't about arrival. And it's 5.5 years since your kind of last direct interview of me, and it's 10 years almost to the week since my operation, and it's 19 years since I came out. It's 15 years since I took hormones, and I think I thought it was about 10 years ago, I thought it was arrival, that the op was the end of it. In fact, that was the beginning of another journey. It was the beginning of being in my body without body dysphoria, let alone gender dysphoria. It was about coming to terms with that. And I have felt 10 years on utter relief at what I did. Looking back in hindsight, why I did it, what I think it meant, has jiggled around a bit. So I'm not sure I would term it in the same way. I think up to around 2018, even before that first episode, I was thinking, oh, yeah, this was the journey to being a trans woman. I think, and not just because of the social conflict changes that have happened around trans the last 6 or 7 years. I think my own understanding moved on. Again, around 6, 7 years ago, I was part of founding a non-binary group in Norwich, as you know as well. The BBC came to film, and I was quite happily thinking, actually, you know what, that's quite a good fit. I like the non-binary fit. So in some respects, my journey went from male to trans woman to non-binary. And if you were to ask me, and I know you'll probably ask me later, or you'll stick it on the episode intro later, that if I was to stick a label on me now, it would be probably a couple of very simple things. And when people ask me this, how do you identify? I go as a human being, preferably a decent one. What are your pronouns? I go, well, that's a whole conversation. Have you got time? And it's variable and it depends who's asking and what it means to you and does it matter? And then if you would actually say, do you have a kind of I don't know, an LGBT type label? Do you have a word for trying to put your gender into a box right now? I would go, yeah. I think where I've landed is post gender.
Like that. Yeah.
And
You just actually said something about if you had to give yourself a label now, because normally what I do is I check in with people saying what gender labels do you use, but we hadn't actually done that this time, although you did mention post gender, which I really liked. And also what I want to ask you is what was unexpected in your op journey, but we can come back to that. So
mm,
post gender, go on, say
yeah,
more
and I
about
think,
that.
and I'm very comfortable. A lot of people transition and then I am now a woman, I am now a man with a transgender history. I would say I'm trans with a male history. I transitioned thinking I would arrive at being a trans woman and then realized it didn't make me that. It made me less man. I'm one of those weird trans people who can talk about biological reality and talk about gender identity as two separate things. And I don't combust, and go into a puff of smoke or something, if I have to manage those two separate things. It was S. Scott Fitzgerald who said the sign of a great intelligence is being able to hold two seemingly opposing truths, and not self-combust. That's my paraphrase of what you actually
Like a
said. He didn't phrase
phoenix
it
from
like
a
that.
flame. Yeah.
Yeah, but to hold two truths and to hold them lightly, as my friend Linda Bellos used to
Mm.
say, that not holding them so tight that if someone tries to take one out of your hand, you punch them. For me, I hold them loosely and lightly. And so in that sense, I hold my biological male history, which, as you know, holds some intersex components as well, or at least some endocrine differences. I didn't have a normal puberty. I didn't have a normal birth experience. And so I've always felt outside of my peer group male gender journey. And I think I've always felt slightly outside even of my peer group transgender journey. And I remember it was one of the books I remember reading. You can't we're on audio, but behind me is a bookshelf filled with like 100 autobiographies of different trans people from 150 years or so.
Do you mean
And I
one bookshelf?
remember when I was trying to come out, I think I began reading all of them, and I would get 3 chapters in, 5 chapters in, 7 chapters in, go, "This is me. This is me. Somebody else has been through this. Somebody else gets it. I get it. They think like I am." And then I get to the next chapter. Oh no, that's nothing like me. And I was trying to find myself in others, both in the general category of, say, woman or trans woman, and in the individual category of the last transgender autobiography I have just read. This is me. This is me. This is not me. But the one I would say that resonated the most, even back then, and I realize years later, 15, 20 years later, it's the one that still resonates most, was Gender Outlaw by Kate Bornstein. And she, now they, had her op from male to female, and I think they pretty much came around from the opposite. Well, I can't tell you what I am, but I can tell you what I'm not, pretty much. I'm no longer a man, but I can't tell you what I am. And I think that's how I feel. I feel less man. I feel relieved of a burden physically and mentally. I feel relieved of an expectation to, in many respects, to perform whatever being man is. But I also feel relieved of an expectation to perform whatever being a woman is, or even being a trans woman is now, or even being non binary is. I'm
Mhm.
relieved, I think, partly through age, wisdom, attack, everything, and just navigating life, that I feel far more free to be an individual now with trans characteristics. Post-op, I will fling around all the terms and I don't get offended by any of them. I don't mind if you use the words that are considered old school to younger trans generations. I'm comfortable with the word transsexual. I still fling around amongst some friends the words, those who we grew up 20 years together as trans, we would call it, that the word tranny was still affectionately thrown around amongst ourselves.
Mm.
And I have friends who use that in a kind of casual, fun way, not a stigmatizing, weird way. So post-gender for me means I've navigated my gender, my sex, and then also then the expectations of gender and sex put upon me by everything from other trans people or society itself or the medical profession. I mean, it used to be that they would never, even back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, early noughties, that they wouldn't let you have the op or let you transition unless they thought you would pass. And if you weren't going to pass, they really wouldn't recommend you for it. And I guess in that sense, I no longer try to pass. Someone literally said, quite rudely on Twitter, X, yesterday or the day before about me. Said, "Well, if you were going to transition, you could have at least made an effort. You still look more masculine than 99% of men," which I don't think is true. It's an exaggeration, but
And it's rooted in misogyny, but there we are.
yeah, and it was. Um, I feel like, you know what? So what? And in that sense, I no longer feel stressed by trying to conform and going out. And
Mm.
I have other younger trans people say, "Katie, why don't you make an effort? Why don't you do some makeup? Why don't you wear a dress once in a while? Why don't you do your eyebrows?" I'm thinking, hold on, these are the same things put upon women as
Yeah,
well.
yeah,
Um, and
exactly.
I was interviewed for a research project last week about pockets, you know, and I'm thinking, yeah, I may have given up the genitals, but I'm not giving up pockets. Pockets are fabulous.
It's so great.
And yeah, so when I literally the only trousers I ever wear now are cargo trousers, which have at least six pockets. So I think where I've not, I don't, as I said, this is 5 years on from our last interview, and it's 10 years on from my op, 15 years on from taking hormones. But in 5 years' time, I do not know where I'll be, but I do believe I have left many of the boxes behind,
Yeah,
um, without, and I do believe my kind of shedding of some of those expectations is a forward step, not a backward step. And as I say, I have zero regrets about my op. It was utter relief, and I've not had a single day of regret. And as you know, beforehand, going into it, I was like, 80, 20, 80% still into this, 20%. Am I doing the right thing? After it's too late. It was, but it wasn't about, oh my God, I've done it. There's nothing I can do about it now. But it was actually, you know what? That was the right thing. But
mhm.
hindsight is tough.
But yeah, yeah. So in your sort of 10 years post-op now, what's been surprising? What were your expectations? What did you think, "Actually, that is not what I expected?"
I think that there was an element of the physical change makes me more a woman. In that sense, I don't feel that, but I do feel more like a a body dysmorphia as much as a gender dysphoria has gone.
Mhm.
Um, that the phantom body part syndrome or whatever. I was quite surprised how integrated the whole thing would feel very, very quickly. I thought, oh my God, not am I going to miss it, but is my brain going to say, where is it?
Yeah. Well, it's
Um,
it's a
and
it's a valid question,
actually,
right? Yeah.
yeah, within weeks and months, that didn't happen, and it feels completely normal and natural to have or not have what's there now. And in that sense, I think I've integrated the body changes very quickly, but I no longer feel like the body changes made me any one thing. I did what was necessary for me to survive and for me to find wholeness through a rather radical, drastic op, but it resulted in a body integrity that actually feels better for me. So I have zero regrets in that sense. I think probably letting go of the expectations that I now have to conform or perform as a passable woman has been a relief to let go of. I think it's a false kind of passing, what's the phrase? Um, an ideal that is unachievable by many. It's an ideal that's unachievable by many women in that sense, because we have the image, whether it's from Instagram or or a glossy magazine of what is a woman, and that what is a woman is a stereotype mostly in male imaginations and photographers and beauty fashion mag editors. And I think letting going of that is a liberation to a much greater personal happiness. I know that in dialogue with other people, when having a conversation with someone, yes, they encounter a trans person and I don't hide it. But I think within a minute, they forget they're talking to a trans person because I'm not making a thing about it. In the end, they have a conversation with a human being, yeah, who's called Katie, but isn't perturbed by that. I'm not. And again, I went down the route of not doing the voice therapy, as you know, and as a number of people in my life had said, why do that? Your voice is part of who you are.
Hmm.
So I think accepting yourself, even through change, many would say that, hey, if you could really accept yourself, you wouldn't have needed to change. No, if I think that was more about if that version of accepting myself, that would have been accepting the male, again, stereotypes that one has to perform to. And
Mm.
I guess I feel like I shed them both physically, socially, and psychologically.
Yeah.
But I think it was less. I initially used to describe it as being me, being trans, being perhaps more female. I don't even use that language now around it. It was about stopping trying to be so male. My own psychiatrist said he thought I was trans for many years before it even directly come out to him because he knew me through my ex-wife, who was her boss. But he knew me and he said, "Oh, I've known you were trans for years before you told me." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Because you were trying so hard to be male." And I felt letting go of the trying so hard to be male was an important step. But the important step in being a happy person who happens to have a trans history was letting go of so hard of trying to be female too, or letting go so hard of trying to be a trans woman and passing. So letting go of the masks, the expectations, it has been liberating. It marks me out as an individual, as a rebel, or as a outcast, even from one's own tribe sometimes.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it is liberating to no longer care in that sense how you are
Mhm.
perceived other than, as I say, hopefully as a decent human being.
Yeah, yeah. I really like that point you just made, like about it's been a journey towards self-acceptance, and for you, stop performing masculinity, like overcompensating, trying to be
Yeah.
so male was one step, and then obviously your other step was gender affirming surgery. And I really like that perspective of self-acceptance being like it's like this, I don't know, two sides of a coin or a pendulum swing or something. Like you should accept yourself for who you are and change nothing, or that's too rigid, you know? Like how do you feel about self-acceptance now?
Well, I remember, well, you just called it gender affirming surgery. I'd probably call it now gender removing surgery. Um, um, and I also remember, going to body workshops in California back in 2007 or 8. So nearly 20 years ago. And I went on one of them with a view to, I can't, in all honesty, make a decision to go ahead with change my body unless I can try literally everything possible to accept the one I have before I
Mm.
then may choose to change it.
Yeah.
And as I say,
Mhm.
my psychiatrist said, "You're the most reluctant transsexual I've ever met." And I went through conversion therapy. I went into therapy, psychologists, psychiatrists, and said, "Can you stop me being trans?" You know, um, and so I think I was on two journeys in the early years. One was to accept my body before I gave myself permission to change it. Two was to even accept being trans was a thing. So first off, I had to, can I accept being male, or at least having a male body? And I thought, well, yes, but you know what? I don't like that thing between my legs, so that has to go. But I tried to accept it first.
Yeah.
But it's like gardening, and you look around the garden saying that plant doesn't fit there, digging it up, putting something else in its place. So I re-landscaped, shall we say? Um, and got the
Yeah.
movers in, and I'm comfortable with that decision, but I'm comfortable with it because it was a slow, long, thought through decision with every attempt to accept what I had beforehand and say, well, I spent 40 years trying to live with 45, nearly 50 years trying to live with that, and it's not ever made me happy, or it's felt discombobulatingly not a part of me.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I think I'm good now to get rid of. So I tried everything. So this wasn't like one of those younger, rapid onset things that some people talk about. I always not felt in my body from a very young age, sub 10, you know.
Mm.
And then as I say, I think then I went on an acceptance journey of, well, if being male isn't working for me, what does being trans look like for me? And I went through versions of that. Can I be trans without having the op? Can I be trans with HRT? Can I be non-binary? What works? And I think each label journey lasted 3, 4, 5 years. There weren't, a couple of months. But at the end of the day, I made the decision about the physical change. I made the decision about the hormonal change, and both had a positive effect on my sense of self and sense of well-being. Not sense of self as a gender, but just sense of self.
Yeah, and
Um,
well-being, as you said, like,
Yeah.
mentally as
Oh,
well.
yeah, and it doesn't mean I got rid of the bipolar or the winter depression or the anxiety, but they were never a part of being gendered. They
Mm,
were a part of, having a terrible kind of, neurochemistry
mm,
that is but that also, I do think to some extent, and we know now, looking back at the last 10 years, that the increase in number of people who are trans does coincide to a large extent with a large number of people who are also autistic, ADHD, neurodiverse as well. And I think that neurodiverse difference meant that I've always seen gender not as rigid. I've not seen relationships. I don't see things in that normative way. I look at them and go, "Why does it have to be like that?"
so
And
gender
then
anarchy, really? Like, you have
yeah, well,
relationship
yeah,
anarchy?
it's a s I think it starts with a social not getting, like, society is built like this. I don't get it. I don't particularly enjoy it. So why do I have to participate like that? So it's kind of
Mhm,
opting out of that, to call it the gender binary, you can do, but at the end of the day, I'm doing what is necessary for me to be happy. I'm not doing what is necessary. I'm not shouting about it and saying, you have to accept me as a woman. As I say, that's not the language I use. I just say, I did what I had to do to be happy, and I'm okay with it. How that sits and functions in society becomes a whole legal extra mess. But the personal journey, I think, was necessary for me. And if I had my life over, I would do it again, and I would do it younger. But I wouldn't shout about it saying, "Hey, this makes me a woman." I would just say, "Hey, if there are some choices out there to help me function in my body, have a version of body integrity and psychosomatic integration that works for me, this is a journey I would undertake much earlier in hindsight."
mhm.
Um, Dilemma of hindsight is, you know what you want later, whereas earlier on it might, as I said,
Yeah.
I've changed many times. Had I done it earlier, not knowing that I might have changed in different ways later, then there is a risk attached to it.
Yeah, it would
Um,
have been a different journey for you, wouldn't it? Like, I
Yeah,
had
and
a
also that's
yeah.
the thing. I am everyone I've ever been or everything I've ever experienced. So therefore, yeah, you know, heterosexual male husband, Katie slash Jonathan is part of who I am. My
Hmm.
Christian journey, my body journey, all the things that I've done are part of who I am, and I have integrated them to the extent that I'm comfortable with the collective wisdom of my life, if you want to call it that. But I'm also of an age now where, as I say, either passing or being categorized in a particular way is less important to me. And instead, I'm just I try to be at least a voice of moderation and freedom. And I do believe that bodily autonomy is one of the human rights. So if you are an adult
Hmm.
and you've thought it through and you're of reasonably sound mind, I don't think anyone's of sound mind, some less than others. But if you're of reasonably sound mind, then you should be free to do, to some extent, what you want with your body. And
Hmm.
the things I did to my body, I'm comfortable with, and they helped.
That's good. That is good. It just made me think as well about people who try and argue against gender affirming care. Yeah, it's kind of like I was just thinking about cosmetic surgeries, for example, for which the regret rate is much, much higher, whereas for gender affirming surgery, I think it's 1% or something. And at the same time, I used to think about cosmetic surgery. I think I used to judge it. I used to think, well, you should accept yourself. I think those were some beliefs that I had in the
Mm.
past. But also, I then got to a place of like, if you have to change something about yourself to feel happier in yourself, then, so be it. Who am I to judge, really? And that could include, well, anything and everything. And at the same time, there is this motivation that you see, especially with cosmetic surgery, obviously, of societal standards trying to conform, because especially women, men too, in different ways, but, and all genders anyway, let me
Yeah,
put
I
that
mean,
out
men
there.
get cosmetic surgery by
Yeah.
going down the gym,
Yeah.
and
But
toning
also
up in that sense.
apparently yeah,
Yeah.
but also apparently a lot of, breast chest reductions are done on cis men, not like, trans folk and non-binary folk, like gender affirming care
Mm.
is for cis people as well. And I think a lot of people forget that, especially and even things like, puberty blockers. It's been made a big deal out of, but they've been used for ages, you
Yeah,
know.
and they were used for precocious puberty, and obviously
Yeah.
cosmetic surgery was invented for people who were injured in war zones.
Ooh,
Essentially, it
right.
was, so the spin-off
Yeah.
from the advances made in a war zone became,
Interesting.
now you're off the shelf, do you want a new face sort of thing.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so it's all very interesting and it's such a gray area and it's so individual. Like we all should get to choose without harassment really or hassle, to be honest. Anyway, that's how I feel. What did we just talk about? Oh, we did talk about. Yeah, is there anything else that you can think of in your 10 years reflection that was not like you expected? Better, worse, both, either,
Mm.
either?
Yeah, I don't know how to describe it really, but I didn't expect it, so much of it, to feel an internal comfort rather than an external or reflected acceptance, if that makes a sense. What I'm trying to say is,
Ooh, mhm,
I thought that the surgery would make it easier to conform to an external physical version of woman, or whatever, ex male, whatever language I'm going to use on it. But I thought that how I accepted myself in the mirror, so to speak, would be in part down to the external changes I made. I think I'm more surprised by how much the external changes allowed me to accept the inner version of me, and how the external version actually didn't matter. Not saying, and I'm not saying within that, that why do you have to do the surgery then? Because I think that was still a dysmorphic
yeah,
thing that I had to do.
mhm,
Um, but then, having done that, having shed some physical layer, made it easier to resonate with an internal version. And and when I look in the mirror, I just simply don't care what I see.
mhm,
Um, and it's, so there's less. less concern about the physical,
Mm.
because of the physical change, if that makes, and that's kind of a weird sense. You'd think that having gone down a particular physical route, I then might do other things to continue the, even with facial feminization surgery or,
Mm.
trying to stay thin and diet and shit like that. Um, but, and dress in a particular way, you know,
Mm. Yeah.
99% of my clothes are off the female racks in shops, but also 98% of the clothes I wear are androgynous from those. Most
Mhm.
important thing for me is whether my clothes match my Dr. Martens and whether they have pockets. After that, I'm less concerned about them. So I think,
Yeah.
yeah, I think the surprising thing was that the internal integration came from a physical change,
Yeah.
but the physical change didn't matter to me in the mirror or even how others saw me, in the end.
Mm.
Um, and so, yeah, it was the internal mirror, the internal reflection that surprised me. And and it wasn't a sudden internal, "Oh, you're now a woman," but an internal, "Oh, you're now whole." And for some people, being whole means, what's that Japanese thing with a broken vase and you put some gold in it or
Kintsugi.
whatever?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, kintsugi, and it's like, in that sense, you're plugging a gap and filling something. For me,
Mm.
I was, shaving something off of the object. I was removing rather than repairing, but actually it ended up repairing the inner me.
Wow.
I really can't describe it properly in words. All I
Yeah.
can say is that when I
I think
look
you've
in
done
the
well.
mirror, it's just not important rather than do I see myself.
Mm.
Whereas before, looking in the mirror always felt like I don't see you.
Mm.
Mm. That what I saw in the mirror had a psychological effect of,
Yeah.
"Ugh." There was a jarring effect of what I saw in the mirror, and I don't mean
Mm.
looking in the mirror below the waist. I mean even just looking in the mirror above the neck, you know.
Mm.
But suddenly that jarring effect of, I don't see what I think I feel,
Mm.
went, and it
Yeah.
wasn't replaced with a different one. It was replaced with, that's no longer important. That doesn't matter. Um, and it's not about how I see myself or how I look to others. It's just I was able to move on and leave that journey behind. And I thought I had until society decided to kick up a fuss around trans people again.
Mm.
Um, And for in that sense, I was ready to disappear and forget that, like, the old language we used 20 years ago was called woodworking. Disappear into the woodwork and get on with your life now.
Mm.
And I thought I would be able to do that, but then society made a fresh conflict over it. And I would say
Mm.
it's harder to be trans now than it was 10 years ago.
Yeah. So it seems that way for sure. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, absolutely. But I really like what you said about the inner acceptance, whatever you want to call it. Like you say, it's hard to describe in words, but that was a consequence of the outer changes you made. And people who might argue, well, why did you need the surgery then? You wouldn't have gotten to that place had you not had it. You know, who knows where you might be? Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't have a theory or words for it almost, but I feel like that physical, I think the weight of maleness in its physical and its social sense was removed like a tumor from me.
Mm.
And once I'd had that brain surgery where the brain was located between my legs, um, and had it removed, that thing that was filling my vision was gone. And that took the pressure off whatever it was pressing on like a tumor, and it gave me my senses back, and I was able to navigate life. I I think had that begin, and as I said, there's a bit of contradiction here because I'm saying I keep journeying and I keep changing in that sense, but at the same time, it was an arrival point. It wasn't the arrival at being a woman. It was the arrival at that finality of leaving some aspect of masculinity on the operating table. Um, and
Yeah.
being liberated. So I feel liberated.
Hmm.
And then I was free to pursue a much more inner journey of, continue ongoing exploration and personal acceptance and still considering, hey, what is gender? Oh,
Mm.
gender is a right nightmare. So,
It
yeah, I will
is.
say
It
this.
is.
I
Yeah.
will. I will say this very carefully. Um, I am gender critical, and I don't mean gender critical. I am a little bit like that, I guess, because I'm very open to nuance and discussing. What I am is critical of gender. That's not
Yeah.
critical of transgender. That's critical of gender.
Mm.
And I see some people talk about going from gender dysphoria to gender euphoria. I think I got rid of the dysphoria. I went through the euphoria honeymoon phase, past that now, and
Yeah.
now I simply, I think, remain as critical. I'm also sex critical as well as gender critical in that sense. I think sex and gender are both problematic categories, both problematic and pressured existences to try and conform to.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's physical, biological sex, whether it's gender roles, whether it's
Yeah.
gender expressions and expectations. I think they are all pressures that cause, in many ways, for a lot of people, not just a minority who are trans, but for a lot of people, unhappiness and conformity pressure.
Yep.
And
Definitely.
I think for me, the greatest liberation was letting go of that and being and I don't need to use the third person language necessarily of non-binariness, but just simply being a person
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
and to discover that it's actually more important to be a person than to be human, to inhabit a body, not the perfect body, not the gender body, not the sex body, and to find a way to be comfortable with yourself in life.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so it's hard to describe it, and that's why use the language post-gender.
Yeah.
I'm also post-operative biological sex, if you want to call it that. And I
Yeah.
no longer do feel that the post-operative, the sex change surgery is as in use gender affirmative surgery, the inclusive language that people have arrived at now. But back when I
Mhm.
was considering it, it was called sex change surgery. By the time I
Yeah.
had it, it was gender reconstruction surgery, and now it's gender affirmation or gender confirmation
Mhm.
surgery,
Yeah.
etc.
Yeah.
Um, the language keeps changing, but the physical facts of what I had done and my ongoing critique of both sex and gender, when
Mm.
actually we're all human beings with a multitude of differences. We've discussed it before when people ask, "So how many sexes are there, Katie?" At least two. And what I mean by that, two and some wibbly wobbly bits around intersex, which can be basically tracked back to born on the X or born on the Y spectrum, as it were. But ultimately, they are variations from the two
Mm.
that exist.
Yeah.
And then gender. Well, I've always jokingly said, well, there's 7.5 billion genders, one for everyone.
Mm.
And I don't mean the 7.5 billion labels. What I mean is there's only one way to be you, and it's the way that it works for you, the way that makes you happy, and the way that helps you stay alive and navigate this world. And sometimes that changes again. So in that
Mm.
sense, am I a snake? I keep shedding my skin, should I say?
Yeah.
And the skin is the language, the expectations,
Mhm.
the conformities, and it just gets increasingly happier and happier to let go of other people's expectations. And to the
Mm.
extent whereby I don't go round telling people what I am, and the fact that some people still describe me in a particular way or still assume a particular pronoun or a particular label for me is based on combination of everything from respect to disagreement. A number of times people criticize me for calling myself a woman, and I go, well, the last time I called myself a woman, I think was 2018, so 8 years ago. I've not used that language since, but some people have used it of me and I've not corrected them. Or
Mhm.
some people have said, are you a man or woman? If you're only going to give me two options, I'm going to pick probably woman, but I'm also not going to deny that I was a man. But if you give me more than two options, I'll say, oh, that's actually more interesting now. But ultimately, I would first say, I'm just a human being, let me be.
Mm.
But then the world still has, as we know, going through the courts continually now, nearly everything is still two doorways:
Yeah.
male, female, pink, blue, left, right, pick one. And I want to leave that matrix. I hate
Yeah. Yeah.
the
Yeah.
narrow choices, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I feel like I don't want those two doors either. I want more than those options because yeah, fuck that. So, how do you feel about the terms you used in the first episode or the conversation we had? You used transgender and you used non-binary and asexual as well, which we can get to. But how do you feel about those gender terms now? I guess it depends on context in a way.
Yeah, I feel I use trans more than transgender now, and just as a catch-all term to say that I have a trans experience. I have had I've made trans changes. I am not denying that I'm trans. And I would, if someone said, how do you identify beyond just person and human? I would say trans next. And I would actually probably say person, human, or human person, trans in that kind of order before I'd ever get to man or woman. And I think person, human, trans are in my top three language terms, and man, woman, male, female, masculinity, femininity are way down the list. Even though they are parts of my experience, I wouldn't say they're necessarily parts of my expression anymore. I don't think I wear anything, do anything, say anything, behave a particular way to identify with or to express masc or fem characteristics. So I think on that language, that's where I sit. Because I think, yeah, so I'm removing the word gender even from transgender because I object to the word gender as much as the word sex in that
Mm.
sense. So yeah, trans sits okay with me in that sense.
Yeah.
Non-binary, I I say the wrong things all the time, you know that. But I mean, in the same way that I believe that everyone is neurodiverse, but there's no such thing as neurotypical, I believe that systems and workplaces and society is neurotypical, but there's no such thing as a neurotypical individual. There are people whose neurodiversity sits more comfortably within neurotypical spaces than others, but basically neurodiversity means everyone has a different brain. But some
Mm.
people's grouping within those different brains is more in contrast to the comfort levels of the way the world is aligned and arranged. In the same way, I would, you know, not entirely diplomatically say everyone's non binary. Um, because there's no such thing as a 100% typical bloke or woman. And I don't mean we're all a little bit of each. We're all 100% of ourselves. I find it quite interesting to this day that when I look at my sister and myself, and I reflect upon my mum and my dad. My sister inherited a lot of my dad in her, and I inherited a lot of my mum in me. And you've met them both, so you know what I'm talking about. And my sister's the girl, and I was the boy, so to speak. And yet, I feel like so many aspects of personality and other things. And I used to think personality was who you are. Well, some of it is also inherited. Some
Mm.
of it's formed obviously epigenetically by experience. And so I no longer put it into these binary boxes. So in that sense, I think everyone is also non-binary. So I don't yeah, I'm comfortable with the language, but I mean I also would just say, hey, I'm trans, I'm a person. The young people might call me non-binary. Doesn't mean that old people can't be non-binary too. But I think it took me a trans journey to arrive at being an individual, being a person, if that makes sense.
Mm.
And also in a degree in that of both external and internal conflict with both people outside of trans communities being critical of trans and people inside a trans community being critical of me because I wasn't willing to conform to the trans stereotype or the trans ideological activism in a pure way. Being criticized, cancelled, rejected by both sides sometimes for not conforming gave me a liberty in the end to be myself and no longer worry about trying to be accepted. I think one of the things you get by being trans and you end up in a community that is accepting of you because you're trans, and you might differ on a whole bunch of things, sexuality, music tastes, politics, but what you have in common is the trans journey. But then that also creates a group pressure to conform within it. And I think there should be a variety within trans lives that is as diverse as the rest of the world as well. All
Mm.
politics will exist. And if trans is true, then there are going to be right wing and left wing trans people. There are going to be straight and gay trans people. They're going to be bad and good trans people. In the last couple of weeks, there have been at least two different trans killers, who've killed more, groups of people.
Wow.
Um, and, so there are good and bad trans people. We're no more or less likely to be good or bad than the next person necessarily because of our own past traumas and all the rest of the shite going on in our own lives and in the world.
Mm.
So I no longer put our identity labeled lives on a pedestal of we're entirely victims or yes, we are disproportionately perhaps likely to struggle, to suffer, to be marginalized, etc. But equally, we're not immune from being bad eggs as well, or bad apples in that sense.
Mm.
So there's a liberty in no longer having to conform in that sense, and so that's a liberty from not only sex, a liberty from gender, but also a liberty even from transgender because it gives me the freedom to be
Mm.
me, to be Katie. There's only one of me, and
Yeah.
I'm okay, and I'm actually quite comfortable with that. And so
Yeah.
that's why kind of my response to the non-binary one, I guess. What was the third one?
Mm. Well, we talked about asexual, so that was the
I'm
other one
still
you used. Yeah.
asexual. Um, all my friends sound the worst asexual they've ever met. Not very good at it. And I said, "Well, that's not true." I said, "I don't remember having sex, or rather, don't remember how I got into bed with someone and whether we had sex, but I
Ah.
love touch and intimacy and flirtation, but I'm really not interested in sex." And I realized that actually I masked most of my life almost pretending to be interested in it or thinking that it was an obligation to be an adult human being to be interested in sex. I've never enjoyed it. It's weird. I really do just want a book and a movie and a cuddle maybe, and then my bed to myself. Um, and again, I don't know if that's age or hormones, but again, that expectation, that will to reproduce, that will to copulate, um, that physicality that goes with sex. I think
Mm.
the very low sex drive I had disappeared to almost zero on hormones, but part of it also thought, "Oh, I'm meant to enjoy sex. I should experiment." And I thought, "Don't get it." I don't even know whether there is a slight AUDHD kind of what is this thing about sex? I don't get why it's meant to be fun because it's a little bit icky. Um,
Mm.
so
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I'm not. It's not something that turns me on. Brains turn me on. Personalities turn me on. The 154th bottle of whiskey in my collection turns me on. Or the
But
next
not in
bottle.
that way.
The next Dr. Martens or bottle of whiskey that I have obsessive collections. I'd rather buy a new book and spend an hour in a bookshop than spend an hour in bed with someone, if that makes sense.
Mm.
So yeah, I think in that sense I am definitely asexual, but I'm a really terrible flirt because I find people interesting. I just don't want to sleep with them. So that m-
Yeah.
so that means I end up in trouble occasionally because I also accompany that I find you interesting with 6 cocktails, and then how did we end up here, sort of thing. And I do love kissing and holding hands, but please don't go any further. That's enough.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I'll stick with the label. You can just add the extra label of bad asexual to it, perhaps. Um,
Yeah. So, yeah, going back to pronouns. When it comes to pronouns, I know at the time when we first talked, you said you use they, them, she, her. Do you still mix it up? Have your feelings about pronouns changed?
I think the expression I've landed on is I used to say they, she, he, and they, she, he in that order. I'm okay with the occasional he that's a slip up or not deliberate. So I used to say that they, she, he in that order, but definitely not he in capital letters, i.e., shouty he. You're not a she, you're a he. So when people are using he, him in emphasis of masculinity, then that still, I guess, hurts of a kind. Not because I think that I pass. No, it's just I feel like you're using it deliberately.
There's
And
a
there's
difference between an accidental, like a
yeah,
slip up,
and
and like,
it's
oh,
more
I'm
like
sorry, and a
um, you're
yeah,
using it to deny trans existence and to deliberately cause offense or be hurting.
yeah,
If you're just using it gently and casually, like he lowercase as I call it, and it doesn't mean you have to agree with trans at all, then as long as you're not using it in my face, then that's fine. I remember being at a conference maybe 3 years ago, so since our last interview, and actually it was a conference that was not particularly pro-trans at all, quite antagonistic, in fact.
Mm.
And the person who was chairing a particular panel was not particularly was quite gender critical, but also said to me before we went on, "How would you like to introduce me? How would you like to be introduced, Katie? And what pronouns would you like to use for me?" I said, "Really? You want to use pronouns in this place? That's going to not land very well. Just call me Katie." And if you can't call me that because you object to even calling a person born male with a female name, even though Katie was one of my birth names, then just call me KJ. I really don't care. So if someone's just trying to get through the introductions and trying to be respectful, then I'm happy to
Mm.
muddle through, shall we call it that. I've
Yeah.
had surprising people call me she, people even on the moderate gender critical spectrum, should we call it that? And others call me he lowercase he, and others call me he capitals and shout it as loud as they can to hurt me,
Mm.
or just to, "You're a man." I just, "No kidding, I know." You know,
Just don't
so
argue with them. That will shut them up. Yeah.
yeah, so I don't argue about pronouns ever. I don't take offense at pronouns,
Mm.
but I think for me it reveals as much about the user of them as it does about me and about
Mm.
so I often say as well, I think now that if I would rather people just use they, not because of a non-binary identity, but just because it just avoids he and she altogether. But equally, if you want to use she, I do like it. I know it doesn't land for everyone, but I also will not compel someone to use it, will not, and therefore won't take offense if someone doesn't.
Mm.
For me, and I say if a man uses she of me, I say, well, really, it's not yours to use of me. It's
Interesting.
it, it's
Hmm.
it is she to me is part of the female tribe, part of the female community. And if a woman
Ah,
uses she of me, it means everything. But I'm not going to force her
gosh.
because if I force her, then it doesn't mean anything. And so therefore now say, my pronoun order would be they, she, he to a guy, and she, they, he to a woman if she wants to. So what I'm
Mhm.
trying to say is she is only meaningful if it's an act of inclusion and an act of sisterhood.
Yes.
Um, if it's forced, it doesn't mean anything. And also, most of the time, you use pronouns behind someone's back anyway, so you're not really going to find out
Mm.
about it. So I can't
Yeah.
control other people's thoughts or speech, but I do think the pronoun someone chooses to use, or whether they even bother to ask, already outs them as either inclusive or something else. So
Mm.
I really don't worry about it so much anymore. I don't think I
Mm.
ever worried hugely about it, but I don't worry at all about it. And I've never put my pronouns in a profile, as far as I remember, anywhere. They're not on my email sig. I've even opposed their use in various forms and situations. I kind of am surprised. I just find it as an interesting thing when I fill out a form and it says pronouns. I go, "Oh, well, you've just marked yourself as trans inclusive because you
Mm.
asked." But
Mm.
then I still don't know what answer I'm meant to give. But
Yeah.
I find the asking is the
Ah.
inclusion as much as
Yeah.
what I then say next and as to whether you accept it or not.
Mm.
Um, yeah,
Yeah.
it's
I
kind of
like
weird.
that. Yeah. Yeah. I do really like that actually. Yeah. There's such nuance there. Yeah. My last conversation with Leanne, they also talked about pronouns and context and all that stuff in a different way than you know, how they experience it. So yeah, that is really interesting. Is there anything that we haven't talked about yet that you would like to add?
I guess a comment on where we are socially, particularly in America and the UK, slightly different versions of trans-critical narratives. One coming much more from a religious right in America, as gross generalization, and one coming much more from a critical socialist feminist left in the UK, splitting the left and feminism around it, upon which other people on the right have jumped on bandwagons for because they realize it gets them a vote share, particularly the case with two new further right parties in the UK, both saying that they will end everything to do with trans and everybody who's ever treated a trans person will be put in prison for treating them. So they're kind of criminalizing trans care, if you want to call it that. So I think we still live in an incredibly divisive world. What I would love to see 5 years' time from now, 10 years' time from now, is a less divisive world. I would love to live in the world that young people kind of inhabit, somewhat online, somewhat in person, where you can have, any gender, pronoun, colored hair, body part you want, so to speak. I would love to live in that inclusive world. I just don't think we're there yet. And I think to some extent we went ahead too fast and it caused a backlash. I do think I grew up watching sci-fi. I remember watching sci-fi. One of the things I always found, I've said this before, but looking at a lot of sci-fi from 50 years ago, the way they imagined the future was a bunch of very boring people wearing androgynous jumpsuits. I thought, my vision of the future is where everybody is wearing
Oh,
something different, not you're all wearing the same uniform, especially not the red one, because then you die. Star Trek
yeah.
reference, obviously.
Yeah.
Um, but I
Uh,
remember Logan's Run. Everyone was in jumpsuits, and there was very little diversity in sci-fi imagination of the future, so to speak.
mm,
Um, and I remember, I think there was an episode of it, but there was a Star Trek episode where they landed on a planet where nobody had a gender, and somebody wanted to come
yeah.
out as a sexed gender, as opposed to the fact that everybody was non-binary, if you want to call it that.
Mhm.
And I guess what I'm saying is I would love to imagine a future world where people were free to be themselves, and themselves didn't mean a choice of male, female, or trans, but be you and have
Mm,
freedoms to do. But I wish also everyone had that certainty of mind that didn't shift, because we do shift. We don't develop a solid executive function and prefrontal cortex until our mid 20s, or sometimes our early 30s if we're neurodiverse. And that means to have that fixed, grounded sense of self comes later in life. I wish we could get to that and be certain that we weren't going to change our minds sooner.
mm.
I do think and I have a huge amount of empathy for people who choose to detrans. And as you've interviewed and know, some people sometimes choose to retrans.
Yeah.
I think I think being trans and having surgery, amongst other things, is an incredibly drastic step. And
Mm,
there has to be a degree. You have to be as certain as you possibly can. I think absolute certainty is impossible, but
yeah.
you have to be as certain as you possibly can to undergo it. So I do think it has to be a thought through step. If we could be
Mm,
absolutely sure that people weren't going to change their minds, it would be so much easier. And if we could be absolutely certain it was going to help someone and not actually still leave them with, residual questions and mental health challenges and societal acceptance stuff, you know, I think there's a degree of resilience one needs to live in the world and enter the world of gender as a trans person where we are now, because you're gonna get a lot of stick, you're gonna get a lot of hatred, and you're gonna get a lot of people accusing you or saying that people like you are this, and that the negative stereotyping around that now feels like the 1980s and the language used around,
mm,
gay men, for example. There is now a language around trans people that we're all, some kind of pervert or some kind of criminal or more likely to be violent, whatever it may be. And so I think you have to be quite brave at the moment to actually pursue that path. Um,
mm. It's a
but
bit
at the
like
end of the
the
day,
pot calling the kettle black, isn't it? Because the perverts, they're actually the ones who decided what especially women should be like. I followed Jamila Jamil on, I think she's on Substack, and I got an email notification the other day. I think it was yesterday or the day before, and it was titled something like, "Oh shit, we let pedophiles set women's beauty standards." And I was like, "Fucking hell!" So I read it, but she's right. Especially with all the stuff that's come to light now. It's
yeah,
like,
with the Epstein stuff and everything else.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, so the body type expectations traditionally,
yeah,
obviously, came from men about how women should look. And I
yeah.
think
They
I
should
would
look
love
like
to imagine
teenagers,
a
basically.
yeah,
Ew.
I would love to
Yeah.
imagine a future world where we're free to be all shapes and sizes of humanity, and
Yes.
not just what that means by that is there are millions of ways to be woman, millions of ways to be man, and there are billions of ways to be human.
That's right.
And it would be great if we could just let people get on with their lives and do that. And I think the future does include and involve, therefore, things such as what I would call sanitary, single, safe toilet and changing spaces, so that it doesn't matter who's in the next cubicle because you've got a room to yourself
Yeah.
with a toilet basin in it, with a bin in it, with all the facilities in it that you might want, with a mirror in it. And
Yeah.
that the actual single-sexed nature of some of those spaces doesn't have to be single-sexed, because you can be in a single-sex space of men or a single-sex space of women, and there's still no guarantee that it's safe and that
Mm.
you've shut the predators out, and or even that you might feel safe because of your own past experience. You could be a woman abused. I'm just no disrespect to Christian religion. Other religions are available and other abuses are available. But you could have been, a girl abused by nuns or a boy abused by, monks
Mhm.
and priests or whatever it might be. And
Yeah.
that might make you perpetually uncomfortable in the presence of other people of your own sex. But I can completely understand that you would make someone of a different sex uncomfortable by you being in their space. So I think privacy
Mm.
and respect and the ability and safety come on an individual level, not necessarily a group level. You can't just block out all men to suddenly feel safe, or block out all trans, or block out all
Mm.
LGBT, whatever or all immigrants or all foreigners or all people of different religion. As soon
Mm.
as you groupify a bunch of people and say, if we just remove them, we'll be safe. That's not true. The
No.
very language we have now around that's coming from the further right around, if we get rid of the immigrants, there'll be less abuse of women and children. I said, well, actually, the statistics
No.
show that 80 to 90% of all abuse comes from people and 70% in the home. So you're still at greater risk from your own white British born family or whatever in your own house.
Mhm.
So it's a false sense of security if you just make it an ogre and then ban the ogres, when
Mm.
actually it was
Yeah.
was it the fox in sheep's clothing sort of thing in your own home that you didn't recognize.
Mm.
So I think the move therefore to personal
Mhm.
safety, integrity, respect, and security that's based on an individual level is one of the individual human rights we can move towards. And just in the same way that a disabled person gets access to a disabled toilet, I think a non-disabled person should get access to a just a human toilet,
Mm.
as opposed to a communal toilet. And I think
Mm.
that move towards individual preferences around that would solve a lot of the, "Hey, now
Yeah.
I'm trans, I must come into your space. How about MySpace?" And if everyone has their own MySpace, bring back MySpace, and I don't mean the old, website platform, but everyone has
Ah.
MySpace.
Yeah. Yeah,
Make
yeah, yeah.
toilets individual again, just like they are in
Yeah.
small restaurants and things.
Yeah, yeah, several places that I've been to have actually done that, and I think that works really well. That
And
is
the same with
absolutely
changing
good.
facilities. Not everyone wants to change in front of other people, even of their own sex.
Right?
So
Yeah,
again,
totally.
give us privacy and respect back for everyone.
Yep.
And I think maybe had we asked for that 5, 10 years ago, we might not have been as at war. I think the whole
Mm.
thing blown up out of all proportion.
Yeah.
Um, you know,
Mm.
so it's I just wanna be able to breathe again and not I don't
Yeah.
worry too much for myself, but all you
Mm.
gotta do is open your phone in the morning, not so much walk out of your door and walk into your city, but just turn on your phone in the morning, and you say, "Ah, the latest antagonism towards or from," etcetera.
Yeah.
I would
Yeah, yeah.
just like to see a world where we can get on and leave this particular battle behind so we can get on with our
Mm.
lives, which is what trans people said 15, 20 years ago. We just wanna, transition and then live our lives. Once it
That's
became
right.
organized warfare, it became
Mm.
no one was winning, and no one does win in the end.
No. I think we are heading towards that world. Maybe that's me just being hopeful, but that's me. And I do think though we have to make that world. We can't sit and watch all this shit happen and think, "Oh, someone's got to fix it." No, we've got to do it. We've got to build it. We've got to make the changes. We've got to be allies. We've got to help everyone. So, fuck yeah. Ah. Well, thank you so much, Katie, for sharing and being on the podcast again. And we'll talk again in episode 125, which who knows when I'll get there. Maybe later in the year, who knows? Or early
Yeah,
next year.
I'm not
But
dead.
yeah.
If I'm not dead, I'm nabbing 216 as well.
Okay, you got yourself a deal. Amazing. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
You can find out more details on the website at 50shadesofgender.com/Katie-2, where you can also read the transcript. And you can find Katie on their website, katyjon.com, which is Katyjon, and on social media. Links are on the episode page. Thank you for listening to the 50 Shades of Gender podcast. You can find us online at 50shadesofgender.com, as in FIFTY, on social media and on YouTube. Visit the website to support us, find out about our gender diversity and allyship workshops and courses, and keep up to date on the Anthology of Hope, which will be out in spring 2026. Visit 50shadesofgender.com/hope for more information and updates. We hope you will listen again. Until then, stay curious and open-minded. Yay! How do you feel?
No, it's good. I mean, I love questions because it forces you to put words to your own thoughts that are inside your
Yeah,
head. You
yeah.
don't all get to
That's
say
great.
outside.
Yeah.
I hope I come across as not reasonable is not the right word, but um,
Don't be
not
reasonable.
not not dissing either the trans experience or not minimizing the fact that at the end of the day,
Mm.
it's my experience is my experience.
Yeah.
My reality is my reality. I have to live in my body and in my world, and so
Yeah.
criticism from gender criticals
Mm.
can be as bad as criticism from trans community colleagues
Yeah, yeah.
who say that's the I've had this from the very beginning, you're the wrong kind of trans. You're doing trans the wrong way. You're not making an effort, Katie. You're letting the side down.
Mm.
And I think, well, actually, no, I'm not letting eventually at the end of the day, I've got to not let me down. And
Yeah,
that's where
yeah.
I've arrived at.
Exactly that. Yeah, yeah. All good. So what I'll
Had
do
to
is
bleep
I'm gonna
yourself a
stop the
few times.
recording. Sorry?
I said you'll have to bleep yourself a few times.
No, I don't do that. Fuck that.